welcome. Today we have Delaney Cline here with us, and she lives just outside of Seattle, and she is an employment consultant, and she supports people with cognitive and developmental disabilities. And I'm going to let her talk more about that. But me and Delaney actually crossed paths because she was a listener of the podcast, and then she joined the Not Neurotypical Squad. So first of all, Delaney, thank you so much for being here. And what have you thought about the squad so far since joining?
So far, I am loving it. I kind of felt like it came out at the perfect time for me because I'm trying to unmask a little bit more and asked some advice on Twitter, and one of them was finding community and talking to more people who are further along in their journey.
Yes.
And so it kind of came along at the perfect time, and so far I'm really enjoying it.
That's wonderful. Great to hear.
And thank you for having me.
Oh, sure. It's a really fun community where, everyone, while we're all so different, can just kind of come and be in an understanding place. And it's so hard to find, especially when I've only been on this journey about 6 months. So I'm really just as new as, there's people in the squad that have been in this world way longer than me. So I also find so much value in the Not Neurotypical Squad and on my Instagram and really just like you said, I think the best way to really learn is to get out there and talk to people who are living it and hearing about other people's struggles. And I've learned so much about myself from hearing other people's struggles and being like, I never thought of it that way. That's amazing. So it's just like really fun to connect in that way.
Yeah, it's been really validating too.
Yes.
It's like, and I really like once you kind of get used to the design of it, it's like with the different squads and all of that. I like the whole setup.
I did a lot of research, and I really wanted to make it a place that would be good for neurodivergent adults in general. So nothing that's too distracting or just really simple, easy, somewhere that is easy for people to connect. Before we dive into more of what you do, I would love for you to introduce yourself and share more about your story and what you do for a living and any information you want to give our listeners.
Yeah. So again, I'm Delaney, living outside of Seattle, Washington. And my title is employment consultant, which means that I like to say that I support adults with disabilities in their professional development because it is all encompassing. It's not just about finding a job. It's really about finding the skills, the interests, helping with everything from building resumes to interview prep, support in the interview, on the job, accommodations, all of that good stuff. And so I kind of came into this community, I guess, because about probably a year ago, I just wanted to go a little bit further with supporting my clients. So I was trying to find people with disabilities, autistic people, to help give some advice, guide me into how to better support my clients. And I came across the Actually Autistic hashtag on Twitter. And started quietly interacting a little bit, I guess, reading a lot of it. And it took me a long time to figure out that I related to a lot of it. But then I look back.
Remember what it was? Do you remember did you have a light bulb moment?
I've been trying to think about this, and I don't think I did. I think it was a pretty slow process. At first I was reading things and I was like, this sounds like some people in my life, people in my personal life. And then I think it was there's those lists that are specifically about women. And it was I think I read through it once
for me. The list of more, when I found it was a list of female traits, and now as I get more into the community, I really don't believe it's just female. I think it's just more of an atypical presentation. But that was my light bulb moment when I read, it was like reading my whole life story in a list.
Mm-hmm.
And not just negative things. Like the great thing about a lot of those lists is there's positives on there as well. And I related to the positives and the things that have caused struggles and or challenges in my life as well. So that was really my light bulb moment.
Yeah, it was definitely a slow process, but that kind of pieced all together. I think still afterwards, I was like, okay, it took me a little while to maybe internalize it, process it
Right.
all.
Yes.
But then since then it's been like, oh yeah, that it
Yeah.
all makes sense. Yeah, so that I guess then now I look back on it, I'm like, someone who is neurotypical probably wouldn't have spent as much time as I did just browsing.
I was thinking that when you started on that direction, I'm thinking, yeah, you already had this, like, it was almost like your brain like craving the info for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can deep dive, and it was literally like every day. But that's how I work.
Yes. Me too.
I guess I really didn't get as much out of it for supporting my clients than I did for myself, except just accepting and being I think I always had just this know how to interact with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
And really just getting to know them. And I think that's really what I've gotten out of it all, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest part for employment for me, is really understanding the client and their skills, their interests, taking the time to learn the person.
Yeah. That's good. Do you think some of your, not, you don't have to answer this if this is putting you on the spot, but do you feel like you, being neurodivergent yourself, understand your clients and their needs a little better than maybe other people who work in your department?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it is patience,
Mm-hmm.
because I would be patient with myself. So
Right.
being
So
patient
for
with
you,
them.
your approach is to kind of treat them like the way that you would appreciate to be treated, basically like taking extra time and understanding and patience.
Absolutely.
That's great.
I take a lot longer than some people do to get to know the person and build relationships, because I know for me it takes a long time to feel comfortable opening up and sharing with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And I may not share exactly my passions, my interests right away, because that could be
Right.
used in a different, like how I didn't want it to be used. And I won't go into too much detail about any clients, but it took probably 8 months for someone to share their real interest, their real career
Really?
dreams with me. Yeah. And
Why do you think they took so long? Like, why do you think adults with disabilities that are looking for employment, do you think they come in with already a negative view of what you're trying to do for them?
um, I think this scenario specifically is kind of, it's not a job that you would it's in the technology field. So
Okay.
they probably hadn't been believed before that they were capable of doing something like that, and
Right.
maybe shared it with some people and they're like, cool, I get that you're on the
Right.
computer all the time, but
Right.
let's be realistic here. Um, and I'm like, that's so cool. How do we get to that?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but it did take a very long time for them to open up about it.
Right.
So I mean, that's kind of my introduction to what I do and how I came into um, figuring out that I'm autistic. But I look back now and the rest of my life, it's like, yep, that all makes sense. I always knew that I was a little different, but I think that my family was kind of the perfect scenario for someone growing up autistic or neurodivergent in general.
That's
they
good.
encouraged
So
me
you
to
felt
be.
like you had a lot of support and acceptance in who you were.
Absolutely. I think the reason that I got by was because, and I hear this a lot from people, I've read it a lot, is that I was smart and I got by in school, but I struggled with definitely some other things. So I was not really noticed that I was struggling.
Right.
But I always knew that and I don't know if this is offensive to anyone because, it is a word that kind of gets used sometimes, but I definitely identify with being a weirdo. And
Oh yeah, I'm the biggest weirdo I know. That's okay. I've
and
embraced it at this point, but before I used to be like, why do I think like that? Like, why is my brain so weird, like on the inside? Like, I can't control it. Like, what's wrong with me? I used to think those
yeah,
things. Yeah,
so my family encouraged being weird.
that's
And it
great.
was
I love
like,
that.
just just do it. Don't care about what anyone has to say about you. And I
Do you
think
think
that
anyone in your
really,
family is neurodivergent themselves?
oh yes.
Yeah. We don't have to go
Um,
into it, too far. Don't want to like get too personal for you, but when you said that, I'm thinking because that's kind of how I'm raising my kids, who all three are diagnosed on the spectrum, and as well as my son has ADHD as well. So, I'm thinking to myself, oh, they must be neurodivergent because it's not normal for a family to raise their kids like be as weird as you want. You don't worry about
yeah.
fitting in, follow your passions, like, and that's amazing. And I actually think that's how every family should raise their kids, especially in this day and age where you have access to so many opportunities more than ever. Why not encourage your kids to just experience life and what they're passionate in?
Yeah, and I think this is actually one of the reasons that it took me a long time to really identify with it was because I didn't necessarily, everyone talked about like some components of trauma and bullying
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
that, and I didn't necessarily relate
Mhm.
to that. And I've heard some discussions about like what does autism actually look like without the trauma component to it. Um, and definitely I look back and I'm like, okay, I was bullied a little bit. I just didn't register it. Or I
It was
just
like
didn't
delayed, like you
care.
processed it 10 years later. Because I
Oh
I have
yeah.
things like that where I was like, "That was really horrible," but I didn't even
Yeah,
know it at the time. Like,
absolutely.
yeah, I've had that where it, like, goes right over my head. But then I have found in those situations, it still does hurt later. Like, you still feel like even if something happened to you, like, even in early teens, like for me, I'm 35, so that's more than half my life ago. But sometimes I think about some things and I almost, like, feel a little hurt, and it's something that I didn't hurt about at the time, but it's, like, something where this
Hmm.
delayed processing can does still affect us in some way, but probably not as bad as processing it as, like, a preteen or something.
Oh yeah, I'm glad
Yeah.
that my brain shielded me from that.
It's protecting you.
Definitely. Anyway, I mean, a little bit more about my family. And growing up, I know one of the biggest things that I think helped me, besides being encouraged to just be weird, was I actually, and this is not typical, I think, but I played a lot of sports. And I
Mhm.
think it was very beneficial because my parents were always my coaches. And
Oh, that's
every single
good.
year, I had that social element, but I
Yeah.
was always kind of, wouldn't necessarily have considered them friends, even though we played sports together for like
You were
10
safe.
years.
You were safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm. That's really
Um,
great.
and I know movement is so big
Mhm.
on helping with it. So yeah.
Yeah. I did everything I could do. I was not typical with that. Like my son, for instance, he has never wanted to be involved in sports, really no group activities. Like he's very different. Me as a kid, it was like I was very sensory seeking, so I was out, I wanted to experience everything. I loved how rough sports were. Like for me, that was like a way for me to like get whatever that like sensory seeking was inside me. It like helped me get that out. And sports helped me a lot. And also the structure of sports, you have to learn new things, and there's rules, and there's very specific rules, and I love that. And I also loved, I started ballet very young, and I loved ballet. And it's funny because my parents actually put me in ballet because I was on my toes all the time as a girl.
Mm.
And they thought at 2, I'm running around on my toes, which is considered toe walking and is a trait of being autistic. And they were like, "Oh, look at the little ballerina," you know. And I also loved classical music. My mom was very into classical music, and they were like, "Oh, we got to get her in ballet." And I loved it. But I think what I loved about ballet the most was the extreme structure, and it's a very strict environment. And I loved that because I knew what to expect. I knew what was expected of me. Ballet is also very black and white, where a teacher that is teaching you tells you exactly what they want from you. And it's not always nice, but I prefer that to like these social situations where I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'd rather almost people be mean than like not know what I'm supposed to do. And also ballet and sports definitely helped me a lot with, you know, physical things, and even like probably socially too, because you know, with sports, there's a lot of teamwork involved, especially like I played field hockey, which is common around here. It's like kind of like soccer, but with sticks. And then basketball and softball, all very big like team sports that you really have to have your head in the game and work with other people. And that really, really helped. And but it's funny, I just want to side note, I have talked about this on my page on Instagram. I think I made a meme or something, and it was kind of calling out to that while sports are really great for kids who want to play them, I think a lot of the time autistic kids are like their parents make them play sports, and it's also
Mm-hmm.
cannot be good because
Oh yeah.
it's like if you don't want to play sports, that's like hell. Hell, like to play sport. Like me, I loved it. I enjoyed it. I enrolled myself whenever I could. But my son, if I made him play sports, like it would literally be traumatizing for him. Like he has no desire. He doesn't want to know anything about them. He doesn't want to know the rules. Like he doesn't like the environment because it can be tense, and he's more of an avoider, a sensory avoider, and he gets stressed and doesn't feel like he can handle the environment. So I want to say that while I am pro sports for the autistic kids who want that, it's also not good to force your kids to play sports if they hate them, or maybe find a sport that they like more, like archery or something fun that's more independent where they can still get some physical help.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And I
Anyway, I
know we were
trailed
going
off
to talk
there.
about
Sorry.
sports all day. Just one final thing about sports, and then we can go to
Sure,
employment.
sure.
But I kind of related to that. I look back, and while I did play team sports, which was super helpful, I always gravitated to the positions that were like pretty independent. Like I
Goalie.
played soccer and I played goalie. Definitely.
I've heard that a lot. I did soccer 1 year, and I was goalie as well.
Yep.
And I've heard that from a couple different autistic people that they were goalie, which is really funny. It's the people that are like,
Softball?
I don't mind being in the back, and then
Yeah.
I'll just, you know, dive when I need to, and that's it.
Exactly. Softball, I played outfield, so I was away from the action. And
I was second base for softball. I was very much in the action for that. And if they ever made me be outfield, I would have been upset because I had to be like infield in the action.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was mad when they were like, you're too good to play outfield, play first base. I was like, but just let me be out there. Just kind of moving
Coach
around.
was probably like, what the heck is wrong with this kid? I'm telling her she's good and she needs to, you know, be in a really like good position, and she doesn't want it.
Exactly.
I know. So funny.
I know earlier you had asked me, kind of wondering how I got into the field of,
Yes.
um,
Like, was that something you were seeking, or was it just a job opening?
So I graduated from college, and I had did international studies, and I really wanted to do immigration work, but
Oh.
as I was graduating, funding was kind of cut significantly for those types of positions.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so it was really difficult to find anything there, and so I was just kind of looking for really
Right.
anything. And I came across this ad on Craigslist. And so I'll go back a little bit, I guess. I have an aunt who has Down syndrome, and she's
Okay.
lived with my family. She started living with my family when I was in ninth grade, after my grandparents passed away. And we weren't super close before that, but as soon
Mhm.
as she moved in, we were like BFFs. We,
Oh.
yeah, we did a lot together, and we just kind of, was just drawn to her. There was something about like our relationship that really, went further than with her and my sisters. And,
So you guys got really, really close.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
then
I
I
love that.
actually coached a soccer team for kids with
That's
disabilities.
great. That's
Um,
wonderful. How was
yeah,
that experience? Did you enjoy it?
yeah,
I'm sure
it
it
was
comes with some, learning curve and all of that, right?
absolutely, it was really unstructured. There was just a lot of running around having fun, but the games were really cool because they would play against like a like kids without disabilities.
Oh,
So
okay.
they got that experience of
That's great.
yeah, all of the games were against other teams. And those were really fun. I wasn't super outgoing out there, I guess. So it was a
Mhm.
little hard being a coach being like 17, but
Right,
but it would probably, I mean, it formed part of who I am.
right.
Absolutely.
Sounds like it.
Um, so when I came across this job posting, it's about, it mentioned like coaching people with disabilities, like
Mhm,
job
mhm.
training. Um, and it didn't really need too much background, like an education in it, or too much experience having done it.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just applied for it, and it ended up being kind of the perfect spot. And I'm really glad that this is the first job that I got out of college.
That's great.
Um,
How long have you been
something
doing it?
coming up on 2 years.
Oh, great. Okay. So you have quite a bit of experience.
Yeah. And I think what really kind of, I guess, makes strengthens it. I mean, I have the backstory. I have the personal side of it.
Mhm.
I have an aunt with a disability, and she moved from San Diego, where there were a lot of services. She actually worked at a Starbucks for a little while, up to
Mhm.
where my family lived, a little bit north, like 6 hours north, but in
Right.
California terms, it's not that much. Um,
Right.
and it's kind of rural. There's not very many supports. She has not had an actual job since she moved up there in 2010.
Really.
Really.
And she's had work experience and she still can't find anything.
Hmm.
That's
There's a
terrible.
couple of organizations that are job training, but they've deemed her essentially unemployable.
Even
Um,
though she's worked before?
yeah.
That
And
doesn't
so
make
she,
any sense to
yeah,
me. Like
yeah,
she probably has references and everything, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean,
okay.
it's like 10 years ago, so they may be a little outdated now, but
Right, right.
still.
Yeah.
Um,
How did
so
she take that? Like, did she love working and is she like has this kind of saddened her or
a little bit. She absolutely loved working, and especially having a job at like Starbucks. She
Mhm.
still is obsessed with Starbucks. Um, and
That's so sweet.
she's definitely sad about it, but I would not say it's hardened her. She's still always telling me about these places she wants to work at, and like has talked to them about jobs.
Yeah,
um so she's not giving up.
that's
And
good. That's good. That's really good. And I suspect that your parents have a little bit of a hand in that, right? Like keeping her motivated for that, or is she just kind of that kind of
I,
person? Like she's just not
I
gonna
think
quit.
she's just that kind of person.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so great. One of my
um
first jobs I ever had was at Wendy's, and I was 17 or so, like not late, too late teens. It was one of my first, and I grew up in a very very, very ableist household. And I was raised that, like, literally raised that people with disabilities, as especially physical disabilities, are weird and kind of like, it's really horrible how I was raised. And at Wendy's, there was a worker who had Down syndrome, and like, I remember at 17, knowing nothing about the world, I was just like, well, what are they gonna, like, what are they gonna do? Like, what can they do?
Mhm.
It's terrible. And I hate admitting this, but I think it's good to share, because you can grow out of ableism. And ableism, for anyone that isn't quite sure, it's basically the idea that, and treating people with disabilities like they are, they have less worth than people who don't have disabilities, basically. And I was raised that way. And her, I'm not going to say her name, but I'll call her B. And B ended up being my favorite coworker I've ever had. Like, she was funny, she would tell jokes, she, like, loved customers, like, and she was basically, like, in charge on the weekends of, from like 12 to 5, like, making sure all the tables were clean. And no one worked as good as her. Like, she was so good at her job. She loved it. She would sing to the people coming in, and, like, she was amazing, and she was so happy. And, like, it's not a teenager's dream to work at Wendy's. So, like, to have someone so positive and happy to work and proud to work and bring in this, like, hugely positive energy, like, she meant so much to me. And I still, like, think about her all the time. I'm actually, like, tearing up talking about her, because, like, I was such a, like, just, like, autistic teenager. I didn't know it at the time, but I hated Wendy's. I was like, this is the worst job in the world. And, if you've been to fast food, like, it's stressful, it's loud, it's like, probably, like, the worst job someone that who has, like, sensory sensitivities could work in, because I really struggled there. Very overwhelming when you get long lines, like, your manager's, like, yelling at you, and it's like, I'm going as fast as I can, very stressful. And just, like, having someone there who was like, I'm thankful to work here, and such a positive attitude, meant so much to me. So, like, she was just the coolest. And, I've seen what people with, Down syndrome or physical disabilities can offer so much to us, that we miss, that we forget about.
I love to hear that story because that's exactly what I do all day,
Remind people of
every
that,
day.
right?
Yeah.
That people with disabilities have things to offer in all different types of positions.
Mhm. And there's something about, like, being given a chance and being believed in
Yes.
that you can work, that you will, I mean, just go above and beyond. That's, like, what they've been waiting for their
She
entire
couldn't wait to
life.
go to work every weekend, and she'd be like, "Can't
Yeah.
wait to see you next weekend." Like, it was amazing. Yeah.
Oh, it's so sweet.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I love it.
you think about people that, for some people, a lot of us were just like, I don't want to work. And for other
Mhm.
people, that maybe we don't interact with as much, work, they do want to work, and it gives them, comfort, and more interaction that they don't always get, and they really appreciate that. So
That's
awesome.
definitely my aunt, because she's at home most of the time because there's not even, like, the day program services, she's kind of exhausted through all of them in the area,
Mhm.
so she's at home a lot, um,
Oh,
and so it's just, like, being out once a week for 2 hours at work would mean the world.
right. Right. And it's, I wish more businesses would, and there are, I think that it's getting out there. There are businesses, like, there's in Philadelphia, at least, quite a few grocery stores have really stepped up and hired a lot of people with especially physical disabilities, and really opened up a space for them. But I just wish more companies would make that a priority.
Yeah,
Do you
and
have a hand in that as well? Like, does who you work for kind of also raise awareness about that, or is it really just, like, job search and keeping a job and stuff like that?
So it's kind of like a two-part job. Part of it is supporting the adults with disabilities in employment, and then um, the other half of it is actually going out and talking to businesses and creating awareness and helping them create inclusive job opportunities. So a lot of the times we don't just find jobs on the internet or anything like that. We actually are talking to the business and what we call carving positions. So
That's
um,
wonderful.
yeah.
I think
Uh,
that's what organizations need to be doing, because I think it's pretty clear that businesses aren't going to carve these out on their own in a lot of cases. So that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's probably how we get like 90% of the jobs, is actually
Great.
working with the business to,
I mean, that's not
identify.
great, but it's great that you're
Yeah.
doing that. I just wish you didn't
Yeah.
have to do that, but it's great that you're, creating the change for the people that you serve. Like, that's really great.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I mean, this is not charity work.
Hmm.
And like with your story, you explained like having someone with a disability in a business is not charity work. And
Right.
that's what I think a lot of people think it is sometimes, but we actually go to the business and figure out what their needs are, what's not getting done. How can we work with you and for you to make you, like, your business more efficient, better, work better for your needs?
That's great. So, a couple quick questions from me, and then I'm actually going to open it up to a couple questions from listeners of the podcast and also some people from the Not Neurotypical Squad. So, first, I would really like to hear about more about like tips you give to people on the spectrum for interviews. I know that's a really hard thing. I've gotten asked a lot of questions about like interviews in general, just because if you Google search interviews and you see the tips, it's very neurotypical tips. So it's like make eye contact, be confident, have charisma, be passionate. And that's not something that comes naturally to some people on the spectrum. Some people can be monotone, or some people can even be overly charismatic about a job they really want, or something like that. So, what is some tips that you give people who are really struggling with behaviors in interviews?
A lot of what we'll go into the business first and say, hey, they may not be able to make eye contact, but that doesn't mean they're not paying attention. So we
Okay.
prep the business a lot
So
for
you're
what to
you're really like
expect.
an advocate for like pre-interview for them.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a good idea for a pre-interview to say that, to advocate for themselves? If they don't have a coach like you, do you think it's a good idea for someone who's been emailing back and forth with an HR at a company and say, listen, you reached out to me, you like my resume, and I just want to be open and not surprise anybody that I do kind of struggle with eye contact, but maybe say if it's not a customer facing role, like maybe throw it out there and say, I don't think that has anything to do with my abilities that I could offer still? Or like, do you think that's a good idea to be open before an interview, or even like opening up in an interview when you're there?
Yeah, I know that can be really, really scary.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
Totally.
but I think over time and reading other people's accounts, I've kind of come to that conclusion. Even if it is over email, I guess over the past 6 months, I've just learned to advocate for myself
Hmm.
personally, because no one else is, or advocate and accommodate myself, because
Hmm.
no one is really going to do that for me. And if I
Right.
front load it, then we're going to mitigate a lot of problems in the long term.
That's true.
Um, and I mean, you definitely want to frame it around your strengths.
Hmm.
So if you're saying, I may not be able to make eye contact, but I'm definitely still here, I'm definitely listening. Here are my skills that don't necessarily require that.
Right.
Um,
Right. I think that's really good what you just said. To frame it in a way like if I'm not looking at you, that doesn't mean I'm not listening, because I think a lot of neurotypicals, or even neurodivergent people that don't have experience with that, someone with ADHD might have not struggled with eye contact. So even if they are neurodivergent, they might think or assume, because we've been taught that if you don't make eye contact, you're not listening or not paying attention. So I think that's great too, if you do struggle with that or anything that you are throwing out there, make sure you're explicitly clear about what that means and why it's not an issue for the person interviewing, or shouldn't be.
Like, hey, I really want to give you my most honest answer to these questions. And to do that, I may need to be looking down because that helps me focus more.
Right.
Things kind of like that.
So what about being realistic? Someone who struggles with eye contact probably shouldn't go for a customer facing role where that might be really important to a company, right? Is that, or should they go for it? What do you think?
I know in a lot of places, I think this is kind of difficult to answer living in a metro area, like a city, because there are a lot of different types of jobs.
Yeah.
And some places there
You're
might
right.
not
It
be the
does
luxury.
really depend where you live. It does. Like the culture where you live. It definitely depends on that. Like I know in Philadelphia, which is it's kind of seen kind of like New York, kind of like rude, and it's common to not make eye contact walking around in the city. And then there's other cities in the country where that is not common. I think California, I think it's a little more common to be like,
Hey,
smile at
yeah.
people. Like no one smiles at each other here, which I kind of love, because I don't have that like expectation placed on me. But here, maybe you might have better luck getting a customer facing role, even if you struggle with eye contact, just because if it's a job, if it's a company that's like Chick-fil-A, might have a problem with that because it's all very like,
yes.
but another company might like take their money and we're good, you never know.
Yeah, it's funny. Here we call it the Seattle freeze. No one makes eye contact. You don't talk to anyone.
Oh, funny.
Like out on the streets.
So, yeah, that's funny.
I think that there's a luxury in going for jobs that really align with your skills and your interests and all of that. But if it's possible, I would say if you struggle with things like eye contact and communication, don't go for a position that is a customer serving role. Because
like depending, or one that's going to be like, stressful in those areas.
Yes.
Not necessarily that you shouldn't go for it all, but maybe one, like you're not going to want to get like a part-time Christmas position at Target as a checkout person, like, where it's going to be really stressful and high volume and like very demanding. Just kind of like take those kind of things into account. But sometimes that's hard. And also I think about my own struggles. So just sharing of my own job struggles, I have had no issue finding jobs, which is rare for people on the spectrum, but my issue has been keeping jobs. So the first like difficult situation, first of all, I didn't know I had social issues until I realized I was autistic. I knew that I had struggles and I didn't really know why, which made work environments really, really tough. And I find now looking back, it's so easy to see it, but now I look back and I see that I didn't always know what was expected of me, and that really stressed me out. And if I didn't understand something, I would not pursue understanding it. I would just faked it, just like I always did.
So relatable.
That's what I did as a kid. That's how I got through school, which was barely. And I did not have a supportive family, and they were just clueless. Like they weren't a family, like they just had their own issues. Like my parents had their own issues. They weren't worried about anything. She's smart, she's going to be fine. It was like that kind of thing where they just weren't picking up on my challenges, my real challenges. And then it became like, you're smart, what's wrong with you, all of that. So once you get that shame relationship as a kid, that's when I started masking. I started faking it. I didn't want to feel shame. So my way to cope with that was to fake it till I make it, which in some ways has hugely helped me as an adult, because I think kids who grow up in a perfectly supportive atmosphere might have a little more trouble advocating for themselves later because they never had to. Their parents always did. So there's like pros and cons to growing up both ways, I think. And we all struggle in very, very different ways into adulthood. But I just winged every social interaction in jobs. I never learned to advocate for myself. And I was scared to. Like, I didn't want any more shame because that was traumatic. And like, I'm sure past bosses were just like, why didn't she just ask me? And I probably like 99% of the time could have just asked and it wouldn't have been a thing. But for some reason in my head, I can't ask. I can't be seen. It was almost like I can't be seen in that way. I want everyone to think I'm okay. I knew I wasn't okay, but I was like, I'm okay, And that killed work relationships. It killed corporate environment, especially where there's the politics and all of that. I was so bad at that. I think now I would be better. But I'm never going to find out because it's just not my scene, corporate environment. But I think that there is so much nuance and so many little things, and advocacy is so important. And I wish really, like, in school all kids would be taught advocacy for themselves, because this is not just something that disabled children need. I think everyone in general is kind of struggling as we transition into like technological life and interconnected life. And I think all kids should be taught how to self-advocate for their struggles or their needs or whatever that may be, because let's face it, like, neurotypical kids at times are going to need accommodations into adulthood and things like that. Like, you never know what's going on. And you think about just like anything, like if you need a day off, like it's just something that frustrates me that we have this talk only about disabled people as well, because everyone needs these skills. Like, and for some reason, sometimes we talk about this stuff like, oh, disabled people, they really need, it's so hard, they really need to advocate. And it's like, well, advocating just comes a little more naturally to neurotypical people, but they still have to like learn how to do it and how to navigate. And it's just, it's something that you learn from experience too. It's challenging, but you have to learn.
So a couple of more things that we do for interview support, I guess, and this may work in some cases, may not work in other cases, but we create video resumes because it can be a lot of times difficult for the job candidate to verbally express their experience or what their skills are, and being able to have like a minute or 2-minute video to show an employer to be like, yeah, I know that in an interview they may not present exactly like you were expecting, but here's what they can actually do. Building off of that, we also do working interviews. And those are super helpful, where it's not necessarily we're sitting down face to face saying, so tell me about yourself.
Right. Just practicing. And
do the job.
I've had people reach out to me because like I said earlier, I had no issue getting jobs, and I actually found interviews fun. I'm one of those like really weird people. And but the thing is, well, for one, I'm not intimidated by interviews. But I also think that being a systemizer, as it's called, where you kind of if you're on the spectrum and you're a systemizer, you are someone who can see advanced pattern recognition, and, you enjoy, certain, basically like finding the pattern. And that's me. And I found that actually really helped me in interviews, because one thing that employers love is for one, I always have to be prepared. because it's hard to fully prepare for an interview, but I like researched the companies that I've been interviewed for. And I would even like throw out some weird random fact, which sounds like a bad thing to do. But if someone like works at a company and they're like, oh, you've done your research, like they're actually impressed by that, which can be a natural autistic trait to like kind of like over research and get too into something. And I used to do that, and they actually love that. And other autistic traits that I would say actually helped me in interviews was I would, through pattern recognition, and I wish I could like explain exactly how I do it. It just comes naturally to me. I often can, this is if you can process fast enough, but when they would ask me a question, even if I didn't know what it was, somehow just going from our interactions, I would kind of know the answer that they're looking for and give it to them. And it sounds like I never lie. I mean, maybe lied a little bit, but I really would kind of give them more out of the box answers. And I think when you do a lot of interviews, which I have done over the years, I've been in like management roles and things like that. When you do a lot of interviews, like neurotypical people really give all of the same boring answers. And when you're someone who kind of comes in and gives a little out of the box answer, sometimes they really like that. So those are some autistic traits that I think can actually help you in interviewing if you can kind of harness that. But one way to do that is go to as many interviews as you can. And even if you don't want the job, go to an interview and just get the practice. And that's what I've told some people who have kind of asked me. Like I said, I can't help you keep a job because I have not been good at that unless it's my own business. But interview, like just take any interview for any job and get the practice, because you'll find a lot of people ask the same questions. So you get a lot of practice, and then you start to kind of script, which is an autistic trait. So the more interviews that you go on, the more you can kind of get in your head, like what's a good thing to say, and then run it by someone in your life who has a lot of work experience and be like, do you think this was a good answer? Or once I started to see the patterns of companies asking all the same answers, I would even like research online. Like there's tons of resources online too, where you can type in a common question and you get like 100, like HR will actually tell you like what they want to hear depending on the role and stuff. So there's a lot of resources out there. And I do think, especially in my experiences, my autistic traits has helped me get jobs. And then I needed more support once I was in there. But, you can use your, things that are seen as, maybe negative, or maybe like in general out of the box sometimes isn't seen as good. But I think in an interview, it's not always a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said there.
Yeah.
I also, well, I didn't naturally do this, but my mom told me all of these things to do preparing for job search and interview and stuff. And
My dad had to talk with me too. Yeah. Before, when I was like 14, when I was going for my first like, summer jobs and stuff like that, like he sat me down, he's like, this is what you do. And he had a whole like coaching thing with me, and he like pep talked me. And it was funny because like being my autistic self, I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't need your help. I can do this. But he definitely really helped me. And he was like, and you have to negotiate, because he's like, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's minimum wage, you always ask for $1 more, and like all of that. And that really helped me too. I think if you, as a disabled person, I think also you might be a little scared to negotiate, because you're probably, unfortunately, so nervous about just getting any job. A lot of times they see that as a strength, like, oh, this person, they see it as an advocating type thing, and they're like, oh, this person can come back and kind of ask for stuff. Okay, like it might be surprising in some situations. So
know your worth.
Me too. Yes, know your worth. Exactly.
Yeah. For this job that I have now, I also did research, a lot of research on the business. And I actually do that for all of the places I go out to job develop now. Always pick and choose. I'm like, hey, I noticed that you give your extra eyeglasses to the local school. I love how you give back to your community. Here's supported employment. Different things like that. But with this job, I looked on the website. They had bios for all of the people that worked there. and they had, some people had like a supported employment certificate. And I asked about that in the interview. It was like, oh, I noticed that you, like, several people had this. Is that something you recommend? And they were kind of like taken aback a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you took the time to really look into what they do and what some expectations of the job. You
over-prepared.
Yeah.
Right.
I know. My mom probably meant just look over their mission statement, but I was like, I'll look over every single page.
That's how I was with a lot. Not everything. I mean, sometimes it was just like, ugh, I just need a job. But like jobs that I really wanted, I really just like researched company history, looked at everything I could. And then getting like 15 years ago, you couldn't always find that much. Like that was a little before like every single company, especially like smaller companies, didn't really have websites then. But yeah, it's now you can find anything online and you can throw out some random fact and impress them. So that's always a good thing to do.
One of my big struggles, I would say, in interviews is like, when you like just have to get a job type of thing, they're like, why do you want to work here? And I'm like, I really don't. I really struggle with that question. Like you said, you're able to, fib a little bit.
I can fluff.
Work the answer.
Fluff. I don't do that in real life at all. Like I am so anti-fluff, but for some reason, when it's like a competition type thing, it just like clicks in and it's like, we're going to get this. Well, I also masked for so long that I actually kind of got good at like knowing what people want, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of helped in interviews, I would say. Unfortunately, you don't want to mask too much. So you don't want to make any promises that you can't keep. But yeah,
that one is definitely hard for me. And when I was, getting out of school, I like interviewed at a bank and I was like, what can I find that like I want to do here? And I couldn't do it and I didn't get that job. Luckily something came across that I was actually passionate about. But I think that you can always, I mean, I didn't want to work at the bank, but if you like really take some time to dedicate to it, you can either find some piece of it that you can enjoy or contribute to, but also you can say, I have the perfect skill set for what this job is asking. And it like aligns perfectly with my skills. And even doing your research, say, it aligns perfectly with my skills. And I noticed on your website that you say blah, blah, blah in your mission statement. And that really connected with me.
Right. That's great advice. Definitely. So I have another question for you. What do you recommend for those who have received their autism diagnosis while already in their role and are now kind of faced with having to advocate in a new way that they were never kind of prepared for, or unmasking? And also, do you think they should tell their employer that they have a new diagnosis, or like what would you recommend for someone who is late diagnosed, already in a role, for whatever reason they want to keep the role, or they can't just like take time off or something to kind of process it, they have to kind of work through it? What are some tips you would give to someone who is kind of like realizing all of this while they are in a job that they do want to keep? Like, how do they navigate that?
Likely you either went to get a diagnosis or you were diagnosed because you were experiencing some struggles. And it was having an effect maybe in your home life, but probably also in your work.
Yes.
And I think that the time to tell someone is as soon as like the struggles start to really present themselves. I know I'm a procrastinator. I will put it off and put it off and put it off and be ruminating on it like constantly. And it just makes it worse and harder to say anything.
Definitely. And I like we talked about earlier, for me, it was like, I didn't want to struggle because I look back now, it's because I didn't want to receive shame or the feeling of shame by admitting a struggle, because that was something that was happening in toddler years, like probably as early as toddler years and into school. So going into work environment, it was the same exact struggle that I always had, and I would just hide it, and you're right, like
Mm-hmm.
that's good for anyone, when
I
you're
think you should,
experiencing trouble, talk to
sorry.
somebody,
Uh,
talk
yeah.
to a manager, or even ask a coworker that you trust, maybe, like how to handle it if they've been there longer than you or something, HR or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, I think you should take pride in advocating for yourself. And I know that's a super hard thing to do in an internal battle, really.
Yeah,
Um, but it means that you're taking care of yourself. Um,
definitely. And giving
and
yourself a future, right? Like where's the future? And if you really break it down, if you're struggling in a job that you actually like and you want to keep the job, and you are just kind of drowning, and people can kind of sense it, but it's not enough to get you fired. But where is your future? Like, where's it going to end? It's not going to end good if you're just like slowly drowning. The anxiety is going to slowly build. If you can kind of like do that big picture thing, like we don't always do that. Like sometimes we're just like in that moment and that's all we can think about. But advocating early is so much better. Like you said, like that, it's such a good point. Advocate early with that first struggle, and ask for help. And honestly, I think most companies, while have some issues with disabilities, I think most of them want to be generally accommodating to employees in general. We all have like scenarios where that's not the case, but I think they'd also prefer that you contact them early rather than later,
mm-hmm.
because companies are going to be a lot more annoyed if there's all of a sudden this huge issue that they didn't know about, and then all of a sudden they have to scramble, like you said, earlier on, talk to somebody and figure it out. I think that's such great advice.
And coming from a financial standpoint, even, it's going to be so much cheaper for them to accommodate you than
Right,
to have you burn out and to retrain another employee.
right.
Um, and so if you open up to them, they may be more willing to, work with you
I
there.
agree. That is
Um,
something that I really needed to work on. But it's something I never thought about. Like a lot of our struggles are just things that we didn't really process correctly, right? Like um, I knew I was struggling, but in my head, it's like, I can do this job. So I guess in my head, it was almost like if I admit I'm struggling, they're going to think that I can't do my job. But I don't think that's the reality in most situations. They know you can do your job because you're already doing it. It's
yeah.
just like a matter of
Yeah.
some sort of accommodation that, and let's face it, if you don't ask for something, you're never going to get it, you
hmm
know?
And I do think if you are going to, you can either talk to your manager if you think they're going to be supportive, but if you don't necessarily get that vibe, you
Right.
can definitely go straight to HR. But in either case, I think that you should have a plan before, not just bringing it to their attention and saying, I have a diagnosis now. They're going to say, what does that mean for you?
Right.
Like, what do
Right.
you, if you already have a plan, like, hey, I'm going to need this, this, and this, but it's going to help me be this, this, and this for you.
Right.
And, um,
And learn the laws, learn disability laws, learn what that diagnosis, like you said, have a plan, learn what the diagnosis means for you, but also learn the laws for what the company is required to give you if you ask for it, because companies are only about money and accommodating disabilities. There's a lot of laws around it, but there are loopholes, there are financial things where there's pushback, and sometimes unfortunately you have to prove things. So if you're someone who gets overwhelmed and stressed easy, like you said, that plan is so important to know. Just be prepared for what you're asking for. And also, if you ask for something and they're like, well, what do you want? And you're like, I don't know. That doesn't help you either, right? So you have to have
exactly.
that plan in place. You can't just be like, I want accommodations. What can you offer me? That's not how it works, right? You
They
have
might not
to.
have any experience in it. So,
Right, exactly. Like they most likely you have to advocate, but also kind of educate what you need. And it's really hard because we don't always know that, but as long as you can verbalize it in some way and communicate your needs and what you think might help you, within
Mhm.
the Americans with Disability Act. You know, they definitely have to comply with quite a few things on there.
Yeah, and I'd say in the long term, keep that open and clear communication with your
Right.
manager, your supervisor.
Which
Do
we
it via
struggle with,
email
right?
if needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Set it.
really hard.
Um, for me, I've kind of found it's a little bit easier, not just like you say, oh, I gotta make sure I check in with my manager every once in a while. But I'm like, all right,
Right.
every Friday, I'm gonna give them a little, just a 2 sentence, how I did this week type of thing. If it's on your
Right.
schedule, like built into your routine, built into your schedule, it can make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of go into some listener questions.
Yes.
So Freddie in the Not Neurotypical Squad asked, how do you suggest requesting added support in the workplace directly with a supervisor or manager? So what would you recommend to somebody who is asking for an accommodation? Like, how should they go about it? What should they ask?
I really do think a lot of it comes down to how you frame things.
Hmm.
Um, and not necessarily framing it with what you struggle with, but what it is going to allow you to do if you have that accommodation.
Right.
Um,
And a company, that's what they want to hear, right? They want to hear that it's going to make you be more productive in a certain area
exactly.
or yeah, that's great advice.
Like headphones. If your company doesn't necessarily allow things like that, instead of saying, I can't focus, I can't get my work done because it's so loud in here, that might not necessarily be the best, like how the business is going to they're not going to respond the best way to that. But if you say
Right. Because they're going to
if you
say everyone else is fine in here, right? That's what they're going to
exactly
say. Yeah.
exactly but if you're like by providing me or by allowing me to wear my headphones or providing me, a separate workspace, I'll be able to get this much more done for you. I'll be able to be more productive. I'll be able to
Right.
get my work done. um,
Right.
things like that.
I love that, framing it in how it's going to unfortunately we have to. We don't live in a world where all of our struggles make sense. So, but I so agree. Framing it in a positive way for the company and say, if right, not even saying your struggle, is just say like, listen, like the loudness is even just like affecting me. And if you provide this, I'll be able. I'm confident. You can even say like, I'm confident I would be able to do get this much more done, or be a lot more effective in this area, or give specific examples. Yeah, that's great.
And then like let's check in a week to see how my
Right.
productivity has gone.
Right. So be flexible, which is something that we aren't always.
Yeah,
Right, like, yeah. So, and then offer that, yeah, let's check back in a week or two and see if it is improving, and that way you kind of seem like you're appreciative of the accommodation and the help as well.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. Next question, we have Megan from Portland. She asked, she works at a prestigious public garden as a gardener, and it's a very blue collar job at an intensely white collar institution, she says. She struggles day to day with feelings like employees are frequently mistreated in the workplace, and often it feels like nobody else sees it. So basically, when she's spoken up about mistreatment in the workplace, she's been completely disregarded. Um, and when she speaks to the people in power, or managers, people of authority, she's actually been scolded or flat out told that she's wrong when she's sharing about her experience. So now she's kind of in this position where she's wondering, you know all, is this all negatively on me, like what's going on? She feels like she's experiencing almost like gaslighting in the workplace, which is very common
Yeah.
for people with disabilities to feel when they share their struggle. And obviously the managers aren't getting it because they're just completely disregarding her. So, what advice would you have as far as communication when we're already in this sticky situation? she feels undervalued or even mistreated, what do you think her next steps should be for proper communication? She said in her question that she doesn't want to leave the job. She can't leave her job. But clearly she wants to try to kind of turn it around and make the most of it. What are your recommendations?
This is a really difficult one, a
It
really
is.
tough situation.
But something a lot of us find ourselves in where we tried to advocate and it didn't really work.
She advocating for herself or on behalf of someone
It
else?
sounded like a little bit of both. It sounded like her as a gardener in a fancy garden. It sounds like there's some mistreatment with her as a gardener and her some other coworkers, probably helping her with gardening and things like that. Landscape and stuff like that. So they're maybe almost like seen as beneath the other workers who maybe are working more like management level. I'm guessing here, she didn't say this,
Yeah.
but it sounds like she feels like there's a disconnect. It makes her uncomfortable. Nobody likes being mistreated, so that's understandable. It sounds like she's tried to advocate by bringing light to the situation and has been met with, almost hostility, it sounds like. So, what do you think are like healthy next steps to kind of turn it around, since it's not a situation where she can just quit and she doesn't want to?
Yeah. I think ideally in a situation like this, you want to find someone to be on your team.
Right.
Maybe there's another gardener or just someone to be, maybe it's not necessarily actively or vocally on your side, but that you can relate to, vent to a little bit at work so you don't feel so alone at work.
Right. Find an ally.
Absolutely. I think that it could also be helpful to document it in some way. I know a lot of people are better, more clear in writing than verbally, and it might be coming across not how you wanted it to when you're speaking to management. So that can be scary. You might not share all of the details, or you might share it in a way that doesn't come across to them like it's as big of an issue as it is.
It's not a desk job, so writing an email might be like something that she didn't even think of, because she obviously is not sitting at a desk. I don't know, I'm sure she has access to the email at home, but so you're suggesting maybe typing up some sort of written communication, and after like kind of like taking some data and going through some different scenarios that have happened, kind of thing, like to communicate.
Yeah.
I know it's a tough one.
I want to answer, but I don't know the answer. Because I don't know what I would do.
I know. Yeah, it's a tough one. I think that if it was me, well, I would have just quit.
Yeah.
Probably, which is not the right thing to do, and that's not a good self-advocate. But I think what I would tell, like if it was my kid, I would probably tell them, because I give way better advice to my kids than anybody else. But if it was my kid coming to me and be like, oh, I'm a gardener, and like they see us as like beneath them and it's so frustrating, I would probably suggest looking in company handbooks, if they have a handbook, and seeing if there's like ethics that are supposed to be kept up. A lot of companies don't have that, but some do. So maybe doing some research and seeing if there's some sort of ethical guidelines that the company practices, and kind of having that on your side. Not saying to act on that yet, but just do that research. If there is an HR, I would say document, many different situations. Hopefully you found an ally by now, like she said, and kind of put everything together, and then you have to package it and give it to somebody. So it's like, do all your research, figure out the hard thing is that so much of this that we're discussing is gray area. So it's not people like explicitly breaking laws or breaking rules, but it's creating a hostile work environment. And that's so hard for me to navigate, or, you know, a lot of us. And it's like, what do we do? So my advice is research, you know, figure out what's not acceptable in the workplace, and then try to talk to somebody about it. I don't know. It's so hard.
Yeah.
How do you
Lay
improve a
low.
hostile work situation?
I
Yeah.
know. Lay low for a
Choose your
little bit to
battles.
gather all of that
Yeah.
and then present it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Choose your
And if
battles and
you,
take pride in your work, in what
and I like
you
what
are
you,
contributing.
yeah. And I like what you said about, you know, if verbal conversations have gone wrong, then try written communication from there. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So sorry, Megan. I wish that answer was a little better, but it's a tough one. But I think that you can navigate that. If you, maybe the biggest thing I would say is like, have patience, because it's hard to turn that environment around, but I know it can be done. It's just a matter of being very uh careful. Okay, moving on. I have another question for you. Ricardo from Portugal asks, he is a biologist with a PhD, and he would like to hear strategies for how to deal with being too honest in interviews. It seems like he has a hard time selling himself. He put selling in quotes, and he does not embellish on his CV or resume, and quite like neurotypicals do. So he kind of needs help with more like interview answers and being a little too honest. So he has all this academic background and still struggles with what to say in an interview, which is what we find, that, you know, people with disabilities, it has nothing to do with intelligence. Sometimes it's other issues, and he has a PhD, and he still needs help with, where do I draw the line, right? What do I say?
Mhm.
Like, what do I say when they ask me, you know, well, what do you want from this job? Well, you might just I just want to come in and do my work and not talk to anybody and go home, you know, but you can't say that in an interview, right? So how do you navigate that um, social interaction of interviewing and having to fluff?
Yeah. It is something that I struggle with as well. I think some big advice is going through like all of the typical interview questions
Mm-hmm.
and coming up with like a script and a story for each one.
Yes.
Um,
Like,
and
what do you want? What do you want from this role? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Let's talk about like all those questions that they ask. Every
oh
company
my
asks it.
God.
Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? You know, what are you looking for out of working for this company? Or like, what are all those like millions of questions? You know, how have you navigated a difficult situation in a past job and all of that? You know, like, these are things that I've probably been asked in like every single interview I've ever had, which has probably been like over 100. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at this. And I'm a good fluffer. So, but like you said, one major way that I navigated it is I have scripted a lot. And I've worked on it. Like, the more interviews I've had, I would just like throw a fluff out there. And I'm like, that's good. I'm going to use that every time. And as you practice, like, you have to practice fluff, like practice, Ricardo, if you have family members that can go back and forth with you and practice those common questions, and you practice your fluff, and fluff is really just like making you look perfect for the job. That's what an interview is. um like he said, like, neurotypicals kind of have an easier job and with it, and that's because it's a lot of nuance, and it doesn't mean you're lying if you're exaggerating a little bit. That's not a lie. I mean, I know sometimes it's hard for us to like do a bold faced lie, but it's not a bold faced lie to kind of make yourself seem like perfect for the job, because if you think you are, it's not a lie to embellish a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think Also, sometimes it's hard for us to be, we're a little more critical on ourselves than
Yes,
other people may be. So run your
definitely.
cover letter and your resume past other people, and they will probably have other things
Mhm.
to add to it. And with those
Mhm.
questions where you're fluffing, if you run it past someone, they can probably think of a story or a time that
Mhm.
you related to it completely. And we just
Yeah.
didn't think about it, or we thought, oh, well, that was only halfway of what they wanted. But that
Right.
works.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. And where do you draw the line? I would say go as far to the line of lying as ethically possible. Why not? Why not make yourself look like the best person ever for the job? I mean, as long as you're not completely lying. I'm not telling people to lie, but um other people in the interviews are going to be fluffing. That's what everyone does in an interview. So it is okay to practice some fluff, make yourself, over exaggerate your strengths. Or that doesn't mean to take weaknesses and make them strengths. That's lying. But to over exaggerate the strengths or the things that you would bring to the company or the inner, your position, that is not lying. That's just an interview. That's how it works. That's the reality of an interview. And they know you're doing it. They know everyone does. Anyone who does that, that's like an employer who is giving the interview. They know that you're going to come in and exaggerate. Like that is like everyday common sense of interviewing. So you're not really doing anything wrong even if it feels like it.
Man, I still struggle with that one so much.
I don't know why.
Um,
I really didn't. I almost found it fun. I could like go into this like dream world of like, you know,
Maybe I need to like think of it as a game a little
that's
bit.
what I do. It's
Yeah.
all I almost think of it almost like acting, where or
Yeah.
deep masking, I guess. I guess I just had a lot of practice growing up, but um yeah, like almost like, and that doesn't mean like after you get the job, like I never felt, even with my fluffing, I never felt like I had to like continue that. Like you still get to know everybody, and it's not like you're setting up, I mean, as long as you don't lie a bunch, but if you're just fluffing, everyone still has to get to know you, and it's not awkward or weird because they didn't really know you yet, obviously. Um and you just kind of go from there. And I think sometimes it's almost like this anxiety that if you fluff, like they're going to find out, but that's not how it works either. You eventually, you exaggerated your strengths. You didn't lie about your strengths, you just exaggerated them, and then you have a chance to show them how you work once you get the job. So it's just leveling the playing field, but it is stepping into a role, as you said, like you kind of like become this like master interviewer, persona.
Yeah.
I don't know.
They probably interviewed a lot of people for that position too and will not remember everything
Exactly.
that you said.
It's very true. Like think about the fact that you're, one of the many, and your job in an interview is to stand out, and you want them to remember you, and you do that by exaggerating your strengths, um but also being honest. So honesty is not a bad thing because, well, me and my husband talk about this a lot because he in his position is very high up and he interviews like 20 people a week at least, in his role right now, and we talk about all the crazy interviews because I find it so fascinating. And he doesn't disclose like who the people are, but he'll kind of tell me like scenarios and funny things people have said, and I find it so fascinating. But the people who get the job are often honest about their weaknesses. When you go in and they ask you, what's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness? You get that a lot. Um, they know if you go in and you say, like, oh, I don't have any weaknesses. I can't think of a weakness, but here are my strengths. Like, that is such BS. And they're going to assume that you're not honest, right? Because everyone has weaknesses. So that's another thing. Like, it's okay to be honest. Maybe that's your cue to say, I have sensory sensitivities. I've noticed the desks in here are all kind of like together, and that might really bother me, or a loud environment. So that might be seen as a weakness for the position, but if I'm able, that's where you can start advocating. Like if there's any way I could wear like noise canceling headphones, it would not be a problem at all. Just like something, not that I see that as a weakness, but I'm like, that's a chance to kind of throw out, pre-advocacy almost. And then you look like someone who's going to be really honest with them and good character and all of that.
That's so interesting. Like using your support, what support you need as your weakness. And then you have a solution for them.
Right. Which is unfortunate. It's not like you don't want to see that kind of stuff as a weakness, but to a bit, and I don't see sensory sensitivities as a weakness, but in a business setting, it can be considered a negative, especially for you. So why not spin it as, hey, they're probably looking for, in general, the perfect person for the position because that's their job. But they also often want someone who's going to be honest and, unlike me, come to them with their struggles or whatever. So if you kind of use that in a way to kind of throw it out there, but like you said earlier, spin it in a positive way and mention how what they might see as a weakness can easily be helped with this, and that it's not going to be, a long-term issue, even though you don't know that you're fluffing. That's still something that you might have to work out. Throw it out there. Why not, like a pre-advocacy type move? And then you're being honest, because if you say you don't have any weaknesses, like it doesn't look good.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing, this final thing that you mentioned, is practice the fluff. That'll be really, really helpful.
It's your interview mask or your interview persona. Like we've talked, like on this podcast, I've talked a lot about masking and how harmful it can be. But I want to throw out there to anyone, especially on the spectrum, anyone who masks and things like that, that everyone has a work persona. Everybody. The difference is that to a neurotypical, it's a persona that is improving their life and giving them, they're not neglecting themselves. They're just fluffing. They're accentuating who they are, their strengths or whatever, to get the job or look professional. It's like a professional persona. And when they go home, they're not quite the same person, but they're not a different person. So I just want to throw out there that there's a certain amount of masking that totally is okay. And when I talk about on the podcast and I say, like take off the mask and all of that, I'm not saying that having a work persona is a bad thing or a professional mask on. The difference is, in my past, like I use myself as an example of where I masked my struggles because I wanted to look professional. But in that case, instead of just like accentuating and fluffing, I was ignoring struggles, denying my needs, and then creating a horrible work environment for myself. And it was honestly all me. A lot of the times, sure, there was jerks I worked for and things like that, but most of the time it was me not accepting myself and what I needed and what accommodations I needed or things I didn't get or all of that. And that's the harmful mask. But it's not harmful to fluff your strengths and all of that and have a work persona, as long as you are not ignoring your needs or, work self-care almost like type of thing where, ignoring your struggles and just like, oh no, I'm not going to deal with this right now. I'm not going to advocate for myself. Fluff it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So a little bit of a side note I have about taking the masking work persona at work is, and you might have a different opinion on this being in like a corporate environment, but not trying to fit into the work culture too quickly. Because then that's your work persona. You're trying to really be what they want, but you're not necessarily being true, like you said, to who you are as much as you can.
Right.
Maybe I had a little bit, I was able to kind of sit back a little bit and kind of like watch from the sidelines, figure everyone out before I started
Yeah.
sharing more pieces of me at work. And that really, really helped. I think staying true to who I was, but also not going full force, trying to fit into work straight away. I think it's okay to not have friends right away at work. You
Oh
don't
yeah.
have to try to you're not missing out if you're not going out to every social event and going
It's
out
not
to
always like
talk
TV.
with everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It took a long time for me to find a friend at work.
Yeah.
And
I don't think I've ever had, like you always hear about people like going out after work and stuff like that. I've never really had that environment where, I mean, it was probably due to masking, but at the end of the day, especially at like desk jobs, I was so drained, like I couldn't even go to those
mhm.
if I wanted to. Like it was just like, I'm going home, I'm spent. I have to go come back here tomorrow. No way am I
Yeah.
hanging out with these people.
Absolutely. And be
But you're
okay
right,
with
that is
that.
okay. Yeah.
Some people have like that big social pressure to
Yeah.
do that, and it's okay not to.
Right. Don't put yourself in that box that of expectations of what you think, because normally, even if you get there eventually and you enjoy it later, you don't have to burn yourself out. So, Megan from Canada has a question for you. And what is the best way to communicate the accessibility needs that seem very perplexing or confusing to, let's say, a neurotypical manager, like body language, wording? So this is kind of like the same thing that we discussed in the interview, like things that might be seen as negatives in interviews, but once you're actually in the role, um, basically, how do you navigate like customer service standards that you may struggle with, um, to your manager? Like how, like maybe you got written up for something that's hard for you, or part of your diagnosis that you struggle with, or something. How do you kind of advocate for yourself in that situation?
You can have some resources to share with your manager,
Hmm.
supervisor, because if it is complex, perplexing, they may, and you're the first person telling them this, they might not
Hmm.
understand that it is a wider issue, and there are other people that do struggle with it or relate to it.
Hmm.
And if it's not, first I would say be completely honest. If you're written up for something, don't try to like just say, "Oh, I was bad." Um,
Right.
like,
You're right. That's the time to speak up and say, I'm autistic and this is something that, you know, is different than the general population. And, then you have to advocate for yourself. And it depends on what you want the outcome to be. But yeah, like you have to be honest of why we're in this situation, right? Instead, if you just avoid it,
mhm.
then it's, even more confusing the next time. Then they're going to be like, you were fine with that. What's going on now? Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's just being quick to say, "Okay, I'll fix on it. I'll fix it. I'll work it. I'll work on
And
it."
that was me. That was my mask.
Yeah.
And they would give me the paper and I would sign it and say, I'm going to do better.
Mhm.
That's how, and that did me no favors, did it at all.
Yeah.
It hurt me. Yeah.
Yeah, be honest with yourself and be honest with your employer, and if you need extra resources, feel free to bring them in. If you're
Yeah.
not explaining it in the way that you want to or is coming across to them correctly, or
Right.
as you want it to, bring in extra stories, extra articles, resources that
Right.
someone else has explained it and how they
Hmm.
worked through it.
So what if you have a manager, if you're advocating, and they're not a resources kind of manager? What do you think is a good way to navigate it? Is it just more, someone who's more intimidating? Would it be more written communication, or um, would it be time for HR if there's someone who's really pushy and is not going to be understanding? Do you think that's the time to just go to HR or try again, or what do you think?
I think if you haven't tried written communication and that's your strength, try it. Um, but probably go to HR. Like they're
Yeah.
going to be able to the ones to help you the most to navigate
Right.
that. They know that manager, they know that manager's style, how to interact with them the best.
Right.
And they will definitely be able to, hopefully, if they're a good HR,
I
guide
know.
you
There's
through it.
there's so much that all of this depends on, right? And that's why it's so hard to even do a podcast on this and take,
Yeah.
actual questions, because there's so much nuance to all of this. Every situation is totally different. It depends on the personalities that you're working with. It depends on the resources. Each company has different resources. But I think the gist at what we're getting at here is you have to talk about it. And that's the hardest part for us, or at least for me, that's been the hardest part. But
Yeah.
being honest and open up front, but also spinning it in a positive way of okay, it looks like this, but this is what I can offer with the accommodation or whatever. So being honest, but also seeing it in a positive light, which, let's face it, these people, same as you, they're going to work every day, maybe not loving their job or whatever. But I think spinning things positive is a much more, it's going to have a much better outcome. I would say 9 out of 10 times if you see whatever you're trying to get as positive for them. I think that's like the best advice I've ever heard, because I think about, well, when you're in this situation, it's so negative for you, right? If you're really struggling at work due to a disability or something that that you can't improve, at least not at this time, that is so stressful and anxiety inducing and scary. And then especially if you have like a boss who's, kind of tough, that makes it even scarier. So I love like going to the written communication, sending resources. They don't have to open it. And if you send it in a positive way and saying, don't say, you don't have to open it if you don't want to, but if you say like, if you're interested, here is some, resources to kind of help you wrap your head around, my situation or something. Like if you kind of spin it in a way, don't say like, here's resources for you, this is what you need to look. But if you kind of spin it like, if you'd like to look at this, here's some great resources that kind of sheds a deeper light on what I'm asking for, or my situation or something. I mean, I think that's such a great idea. And then you go to HR from there.
And I know this is like, you may not have the opportunity to, but if it's a toxic environment, it's not going to be healthy for you to be there.
Right. When do you give up? And you give up when it's
Yeah.
affecting if you can, if it's affecting your mental health and you've exhausted, these positive things.
Oh yeah, I'm the type to just quit a job and just leave, and I should not have done that. I should have done things to work it out beforehand.
I've just walked out of jobs and never even contacted anybody. That's so terrible. But it was like, honestly, looking back, me doing that was trauma responses. It was just extreme anxiety, and it was all centered around social communication that I was struggling with, all of it. Like every time I look back and I think of like this job I walked out of, like they probably thought I was so nuts because they probably had no idea there was any issues because I hid it.
Yeah.
But if I had this conversation with you, and like, I mean, it's hard at 20 instead of 35, I do think it's something that I could have improved with practice. Because I didn't know I was on the spectrum. I didn't understand my social challenges. So you, like, teenage and 20-year-olds listening to this or watching this, you have the opportunity to start working on these things, and it's not going to be easy at first. But I think I'm learning now, as I'm starting to advocate in general for myself, advocate for my kids, it gets easier once you start advocating. So, once you have the challenges and have kind of worked through them, you get some confidence, and it gets a little easier to work on this stuff. But it's hard. It's hard every time, but it doesn't stay quite so hard after you start figuring out how to work it out.
Yeah, each time you learn a little bit more of how to frame it or what they responded to
Right,
negatively and how you
right.
can change that.
And every person does that a little differently, so it's, every time you're advocating, it is a little different, but as long as you have these kind of tools and resources, I think that can help navigate the challenges a lot.
Hmm.
So, in closing today, is there any just general tips or anything you want to say generally to the listeners and viewers, for, getting a job and keeping a job with disabilities? Any closing thoughts?
Final advice, kind of summing everything up, would to be find what your passions and your skills are and go that direction.
Mhm.
And also spin positive, have a plan, and advocate for yourself.
I love it. You have been so helpful to me. You've made me think of things kind of in a new light, and I think you've given just a lot of really great advice. And I just want to say thank you for what you do for a living, because I think it's so important, and I think that's amazing. And it's so awesome that you can get paid to do this and really help people. And some people I think do this kind of stuff, like you said, like charity work, and I think it's so true. This is not charity work. This is busting through ableism that's in the workplace, and I hope that you and your company really helps businesses see that people, whether disabled or not, have things to offer, and disabled people don't have less to offer because of their disabilities. So I think it's so amazing what you do. And everyone out there, she is in the squad, the Not Neurotypical Squad. So feel free to join. I will put a link in the description, and you'll kind of see her commenting, and maybe you could throw her a message if you have any extra questions or any. Do you mind if people message you on the squad and
Yeah,
throw out a quick question every now and then?
I was just gonna say, we, like, so many times throughout this conversation, we said each situation is so different based on all of the different circumstances. You can reach out to me if you have, like, a situation where our conversation today didn't really touch on or answer your question necessarily. Yeah, feel free to
Right.
reach out.
Right. So on the squad, you use your real name, I believe, right? So Delaney
Yes.
Cline. You can find her. I believe you're the only Delaney so far. So I don't think it'd
That's
be too hard to
usually how
find
it is.
you. Yeah. So yeah, I will put a link to joining the squad if you are looking for more support. We do have a squad in there, which is kind of like a Facebook group where it's like a central theme, and there is a neurodiversity in the workplace squad. So there is a place for anyone who is struggling right now to kind of connect with other people and ask questions and grow and be like, I just went through this. What do you guys think? Or just share. So there, if you are struggling in this area and need more support, we do have that for you in the Not Neurotypical Squad. So thank you so much for joining me, and I appreciate you also doing a video, because I know not everyone loves that, but I think that I've really tried to transition to more video, just because some people process the information better on YouTube watching and being able to see it. So it's important to me to kind of be a little more accessible when I can. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And maybe we can have you back as we get more fun questions in
Okay.
part two or something like that. We'll see. All right.
Yeah,
Thank
sounds
you for
good.
being
Thank
on.
you.